Okay, so I was just saying that so far, we've been going through Genesis 1 and 2, and we've mostly talked about the setting and the characters of the Bible. And with any luck, if we do get to Genesis 3, we're going to start talking about the plot of the story of the Bible. And I know for a fact that we'll get to a little bit of that. Now, the computer will respond. Okay. Well, really quick review. Last time in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, we talked about the image of God, or in Latin, because I mentioned theologians love to use Latin, the imago Dei, the image of God. Human beings are made in the image of God. So just as a review, who can tell me what it means to be made in the image of God, that we are made in the image of God? And raise your hand, please. Scott.
That we have a soul, body, and mind?
Well, that's true in terms of who humans are, but that's not actually exactly what it means to be made in the image of God. Do you guys remember the video that I showed you? I know someone knows it.
I'm trying to think when we're supposed to act like that was an image.
Yes. Can you expand on that?
No, I can't.
You're nothing if not honest.
Where we're forgiving and I don't know how to say it. Just kept my mouth shut.
That's why TJ left, I bet.
No, she's trying to get it on the Gene. Trying to get Gene on.
Oh, okay.
I think she got a message from Gene.
Vivian. Yes, that's part of it. That's the result of being made in the image of God. But I'm looking for something a little bit more specific.
That he made it above everything else that he made, so that we were in control, like him.
Okay, yeah, you're getting closer, Scott. You're getting warmer, so to speak.
I think the way you explain it is we're supposed to be like Jesus. Correct? We're supposed to be a walking image of what that looks like. In our works and our looks.
Yes. There's a little bit more to it than that. Because Jesus is the ultimate image of God. He's like who a human being should be and who we fail to be. But yes.
Human images are sub-creators.
Okay. Can you tell me what that means, Cindy?
I think that's all I got in my notes.
That's okay. Oh, I think we got the answer, by the way.
I have over here written Tolkien, Tolkien.
That's not that.
J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, that's true.
Or is that an author or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'll give you guys one or two more chances.
I said that I was here, so I should know. Hey, good attention.
I got them.
When I talk about the Trinity,
I can't read that.
introducing this kind of two.
Yeah.
Am I close here?
Oh, it was Buddhist, so don't.
Now, let's hear what you have to say.
He made us in his image, and he gave us control of the new world
Yes.
that he made for us.
Yes.
He's doing.
World that would work, but due to our sinful nature, it did not. And
Yes.
and it threw us into the chaotic mess.
Yes.
We're in.
Ron, you've been listening. And I know all the others. That's right. He's here mentally and not physically.
He only pulled that out.
Over there. That's wrong.
He was going like,
Well, let's be honest. Wives keep us in check.
yeah.
Bill, do you have anything to add to that? No, okay, Ron said it all. No, Ron basically hit the nail on the head. So, to be made in God's image, everyone, and I really want you guys to remember this. To be made in God's image means that we represent God in creation. And in the context of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, that means that we rule creation, okay? Or more specifically, God rules, or is supposed to have ruled the earth through you and me. Now, we don't because of sin, but I'm getting ahead of myself because we're getting into the plot of the Bible. But originally, to be made in God's image meant that God placed us on the earth, starting with Adam and Eve, to rule over the earth on his behalf, okay? So we watched this video from the Bible Project, which I encourage you guys to go back and look up if you don't remember it, because it really is really important. But I am. We talked in the video. They talked about how the word for image and likeness that Genesis chapter 1 uses are the words selim and demut in Hebrew, and those are the exact same words that are used for idols or images in the Bible. Okay, so the idols and images in temples were meant to represent the gods or the God in that temple. So when God made human beings, starting with Adam and Eve, and put them here on earth in the Garden of Eden, he meant for us to represent him, and he meant for us to rule over creation. Another example is in the ancient Middle East. Kings were considered to have been made in the image of God, okay? And that's why they were kings, right? That's why they were royalty. Now, Genesis chapter 1 makes a really revolutionary claim, which is all human beings. That is something that you will not find in any other ancient Near Eastern text. But the point is, it's like kings were supposed to be the image of God. They rule of their kingdom. That's all. And then those kings would erect statues in their kingdom, in their territory, to mark off their territory or to claim their territory. So the example that I gave last week was the Mount Rushmore. You know, and I know that used to be the territory of I think I can't remember the guy or the Native American. Yes, Sioux. Well, that used to be Native American territory. Well, as of the 1950s, now United States territory, and it was before that. But by putting the president's image there, it comes to show that it is United States territory. Or I made the joke last week about how Trump is talking about colonizing Mars, and so here I have it's an AI image, I think, of an astronaut planting a flag on Mars, right? When you plant a flag, that flag is an image of sovereign rule. Another example I gave was on Iwo Jima, right, in World War II, when that famous shot where the Marines are putting up the flag, they're claiming it as conquered territory, and that's what it means to be made in the image of God. God created the world. He created order out of disorder or chaos. You guys remember me talking about that? And by putting us here on the earth, he was basically saying, this is my territory, and human beings are supposed to rule on my behalf. That's what it needs to be made in the image of God. And you see that in Genesis chapter 1, when it says, let us make mankind in our image so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, etc. And in verse 28, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over it, okay? And the idea was that as human beings spread out throughout the earth, just like God made order out of disorder and chaos, we're supposed to make the rest of the earth our home, which eventually we did. Right now, there are almost 8 billion people on the face of the earth. Now, because of sin, it hasn't gone over very well, right? But in many ways, human beings have done what we were designed to do, which is to make the earth our home to make, like I said last week, families and neighborhoods and communities and cities. And I mentioned I mentioned here this idea, or I think Cindy mentioned the idea of subcreators. God basically created the world, and then he gives us the world to create out of, right? When we make, communities and cities, we also make things like art. We make things like culture. We make, we make music. We make stories and TV shows. We make, all sorts of things, buildings, architecture. And we're doing what God has designed us to do, which is rule the earth and make it our home. And in that way, God is supposed to rule on our behalf. As Vivian May said, that is why every human being has intrinsic dignity and worth, because basically what I'm trying to say is every human being was made for a purpose. And because of sin, we have missed that purpose. But guess what? In the new heavens and new earth, God will restore that purpose. Because what do we see in Revelation 21, the new heavens and new earth? We see a new city, right? The new Jerusalem coming down and renewing all of creation. It tells us that this world is good and God is not done with it. He's going to renew it. He's not going to, I mentioned rumpling it up like a piece of paper and throwing it in the wastebasket, right? He's not going to do that. He's going to make it the way that it was supposed to be. It also shows us that work is good. So whatever you do, or maybe for those of you that are retired, whatever you did do in your career, it was a way of making the world a better place for human beings to live, right? That is a way of, making, showing that we are made in the image of God, making the earth our home. And the video talked about how the image that Genesis chapter 1 and 2 gives us is the image of gardening. You're taking the raw earth that God created and making something beautiful out of it, right? Just like he did. So that's what it means to have been made in the image of God. Does anyone have any questions about any of that, or comments for that matter? Cindy.
Okay. What is the period of day 1, day 2? Are we looking at, could day 1 be a 24-hour period? Is day 1 a 10-year period? Is what I'm trying to get at is they say that the earth is millions of years old.
Yeah.
So at what point, God created everything in 6 days. Could one day be 100 years? Or do we know that? Or is that like one of those technical things that we know right now?
So.
Am I ahead of myself?
No, you're not. Were you here last week?
Yeah.
You were here last week. Okay.
Did we discuss this last week?
I think I might be getting my weeks mixed up, but basically we talked about how there are different. Let me see if I can pull up the slide. There are different views of it, and does everyone else remember that? Here, I'm gonna pull it up here. What's that? Yes.
I don't know how anyone can know the answer to that, even in theory.
Yeah.
That is just someone's opinion, educated opinion about it, but I don't think anyone.
I'm with you, Ron. Let me. Oh, okay. Here it is. Okay, so this is a really quick review. There are a lot of different views, is what I'm going to say. So Cindy, you mentioned young Earth creationism. The Earth is 6,000 years old. There's old Earth creationism, which you also mentioned, which is like each day represents, a certain period of time. There's a gap theory, which believes that there's, maybe even millions of years between Genesis 1 and 2. There's evolutionary creationism. There's literary framework theory, which talks about how Genesis 1 is a different literary genre than the rest of the book of Genesis. And here's basically where I ended on. Well, first of all, there are a lot of Christians that, a lot of faithful brothers in Christ that believe that have come to different conclusions. Let me put it that way. And they are genuine brothers and sisters in Christ. You know, they love God, they love people, they love the word. Here are the three things that I highlighted that are most important. Number one, God is the creator. Number two, the Bible is inspired or God breathed. In other words, it's reliable and authoritative, whatever view you subscribe to. And number three, this is a disagreement between brothers in Christ, and we can disagree in good faith and with charity. And I talked about this quote from St. Augustine or John Wesley, no one's really for sure. In essentials, unity, and non-essentials, liberty, in all things, charity. So I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, Cindy.
Well, I guess I was watching a TV show, and
Okay.
it was talking about fossils and different
Yes.
things, and how old they're apparently something that was discovered recently.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm now taking what I've learned here and trying to place that in this show, like thinking, okay, that the animals came up out of the ground, out of the earth.
Mhm.
Could that be when the dinosaurs come? You know what? When did this kind of all take? And that's
Yeah.
what I started getting myself confused.
Yeah.
Was
Well-
trying to follow.
Yeah. So I've been kind of playing my cards close to the vest or close to the chest, so to speak. And this might be kind of showing my hand, but I actually don't think Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 are trying to answer those questions. So those are questions that we have as modern people, like how exactly did God create, you know, the earth? Was it millions of years? Was it thousands of years? What was the process? And the people of the ancient Near East honestly just weren't interested in those type of questions. They were more interested in questions about like purpose, meaning, and so we'll talk. Well, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I think we'll circle back to your question here, and you'll probably see a little bit more where I'm coming from. But for now, I'll say I don't think Genesis 1 and 2 are trying to answer quote unquote scientific questions in the way that we think it. Yeah. Yeah.
They would have been done with moon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They would have had no science.
Okay.
So to them, it's just a matter of time. I mean, it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Sean gives a good point. Back the ancient Middle East was their view of time was more cyclical. Okay, because remember they're an agrarian society. They're relying on farming and crops, and so their view of time is a lot more cyclical. Modern people, in part because of Christianity, we view the world as progressing. They didn't have progressing towards what is probably what they would have asked. It wasn't until right around the time of Jesus, actually, that there was this idea that the world is going someplace or going somewhere. Okay. So, but for right now, I'll just say I don't think Genesis chapter 1 and 2 are trying to answer quote unquote scientific questions, and I might be showing my hand there, but I'll explain that a little bit further.
No, I mean you put kind of some perspective of my gaps, of what I was taking in from the scientific and what we've been taught and what we've been studying.
If you're asking, can you still believe it on seven? So believe this.
Mhm.
I think that.
Well, that's what I'm saying too. He's the God of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's fair to state that some people don't do it.
Yeah.
Some people believe you have to pick one.
Oh, no.
Science or Christian.
Mm-mm.
I don't know.
No, he's the God of everything. So when
Science is new. It just started, what, 200 years ago?
Yeah, the Enlightenment period. So, yeah, that was a really good question, Cindy. And I promise we will kind of circle back to that question, and you can ask me more questions if you have time.
okay.
In my Bible, I have a chronological map, you might say,
Yes.
starting when biblical.
If I don't get over here, I can't stay awake either.
Mhm. I've been awake. I'm awake.
Flood.
Huh?
You weren't.
Yes, I was. I listened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of like what Sean was alluding to, I don't think the biblical authors were interested in exact dates. I really just don't think that they were. So,
I'm not.
they were interested in what happened, but not on exact dates. So,
I'm not getting anything out of it.
any other questions, or can I move on? Or if you do have a question, then please feel free to ask it. Okay, let's go ahead and we're finally moving into Genesis chapter 2. Okay, can I have someone read verses 2 and 3? Literally just those two verses.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Ron.
And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made.
Okay. So I want to really quick talk about that word rested. Let's see. Why did God rest on
Help us.
Let's go. Want to?
Have we talked about this already?
I had Danny, so
You read that last week. Did we? Okay. Did I use this illustration yet?
no.
Okay. Well, Mike had it exactly right. Do you care to expand on that, Mike?
Hey, what you mean, repeat it, or you mean he's?
Repeat it, and if you have anything to add to it, then go ahead and add to it. And if you don't, that's okay.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Does anyone have anything to add to what Mike just said? Well, why would God rest on the seventh day?
Well, the Bible said it, he was tired.
Well, it actually doesn't say he was tired if you look at the passage.
No, but I figured he probably was.
It is a big deal to make the universe. Bill or Ron yeah, he finished his work. Anyone else?
My commentary says, he wanted to indicate that rest is appropriate and right.
That's true. That's true. Anyone else? I'm trying to make this a little bit more conversational today. So Mike and Bill had it exactly right. He took up residence in his temple, and I'm sorry, I said Bill. What was it, Bill? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can't remember if it was Bill or Ron. Bill said he just finished.
I can't.
That's basically it. He ceased from his work. So remember, God is making a beautiful home out of chaos and disorder, right? So here's a good image to have in your mind. When Amy and I back in December,
Yeah. Okay.
some of you were there, right? That kind of helped us move in. You remember how many boxes we had of stuff, just stuff, and we moved it in, and there were just boxes and just stuff lying everywhere, right? And we had literally 2 U-Hauls worth of.
Yeah.
And after that, I just went to town on setting everything up, right? Because I wanted to feel at home. Because we had Pastor Dwayne's home and Carolyn's home. We had the home, but it wasn't. Well, it was, but it wasn't.
It didn't feel that. It wasn't your home. It wasn't. It didn't reflect you yet.
Yes, and it was still disorganized, right? Right. It wasn't organized yet. Remember the words from Genesis chapter 1, empty and void, or different translations say different things. That's what our house was when we first moved in. And you might remember in Genesis chapter 1, the first 3 days are God forming. The second 3 days are God filling the universe, filling the earth. And I still had the filling and the ordering to do. The house was still disordered. So once we had everything organized, then I could rest. Because I was at home. Because remember, God is making a beautiful home for himself and for human beings to live in. And when we moved in and I organized everything and I finally, like Vivian said, I made it our home, that was God in Genesis chapter 1. It wasn't because he was tired, because, God doesn't, Isaiah, for example, says God doesn't tire, but it's that God had finally finished making this beautiful home for all of us, for you and me. And then we had to mess it up, right, as human beings. That's image number one I want to communicate. Image number two, just a few weeks ago, we had President Trump inaugurated, right? He became he was our 45th president, now he became our 47th president. And there was a point in time where he finally, he returned to the Oval Office, right? And he sat down in his chair. And that's the second image that you're supposed to have of God, which is just like President Trump sat down in his chair on his desk in the Oval Office, and that meant that he was officially our president, right? No matter how much you might like or dislike it. That's the same thing with God, right? Because remember, Genesis chapter 1 is not just God creating a beautiful world, but creating a beautiful world to rule over it through you and me, right? And so when God created everything, culminating in human beings like you and me, he rested, he sat down on his throne, in his Oval Office, so to speak, and he started to rule the world. Okay, so those are the two images that I want you to have. Me and Amy moving in, or you've had experience of moving to a place before, right? And President Trump or president or a king sitting down on their chair or their throne or what have you. Okay, let's see. Does anyone have any questions about that or comments? Sorry, did I hear someone? Okay, so when God rested, he ceased creating. Remember, he made you and me in his image, right? Or specifically Adam and Eve, to rule on his behalf. As some people, some biblical scholars call Adam and Eve vice regents. Human beings were meant to rule on his behalf. And just like he created and made the world a beautiful place, he's kind of passing on the baton, so to speak, to Adam and Eve to basically do what he did in a smaller scale, to make the earth beautiful. Now, let's see. I want to go ahead and we'll watch this video. And I hope this video, I want you guys to really pay attention. I hope this video gives you a better idea of what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to communicate. Let me make sure that Beth can hear and everybody else. Let's see if I can remember this. Here, computer sound. Hey Beth, do you remember? Is it stereo?
No, you click on the three dots that says more. And then go down to share computer sound.
Yes.
That's it.
Okay. Can you hear it?
Yep.
If you could go back to the city of Jerusalem during Bible times, the biggest thing you'd see is the temple.
Can you get rid of that bar?
Yeah.
Will it go away?
No, it will go away. There. Okay.
Temple.
No. Well, thanks, Diane. You jinxed it.
If you could go back to the city of Jerusalem during Bible times, the biggest thing you'd see is the temple.
This beautiful building was designed by King David and built by King Solomon, and they believed that it was the home of the God of the universe.
Wait, I thought God's home was in heaven.
Well, the whole point of this earthly temple is that it's the place that overlaps with God's heavenly home. The temple is where God lives and rules all creation as king.
That's cool, but even Solomon, who built the temple, didn't believe that it could contain the God of the universe, right?
Yeah, the building was just a symbol, and it pointed to the fact that all of creation is God's temple. And that's actually what the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, is all about.
Really? It says that creation is God's temple?
Well, it doesn't need to say it. The whole story shows it. In Genesis 1, God creates an ordered world out of a dark wasteland by speaking in a series of 7 days. Then on the 7th day, God's presence fills creation as he takes up his rest and rule. Similarly, the tabernacle and later the temple were built and dedicated in a series of 7 speeches and 7 days, after which the priest or king could rest and rule in God's presence.
Ah, so all of creation is where God intends to dwell. It's like his temple.
Exactly. Now, turn the page to Genesis 2 and we get another portrait of creation. This one focuses in on the land. And in the center of the land is a region called Eden, which in Hebrew means delight.
And in the middle of delight, God plants a garden in which God and humanity live together.
And that's why the temple was modeled after the garden, filled with imagery of gold and flowers. The menorah symbolized the tree of life. It's the place where God dwells with his people.
Oh, got it.
And check this out. In the temple, the Israelite priests and Levites were to work and to keep the temple in God's presence. This is exactly the job description given to humanity in the Garden of Eden.
So these humans were the first priests. But instead of ruling with God, they wanted to rule on their own terms, and they're exiled from the garden temple.
And like Adam and Eve, Israel's leaders also wanted to rule on their own terms, and they too were exiled.
The temple was destroyed, and this left them wondering, did God give up on Israel? Will God bring about a new creation?
Well, the biblical prophets anticipated the day when God would create a new temple with a new priesthood. That's when God's presence would fill all of creation.
And when the Israelites returned to the land, they did rebuild the temple.
But that temple didn't turn out the way the prophets hoped. In fact, later Israelite prophets said that this temple was hopelessly corrupt.
So they're still waiting for the ultimate temple.
And here we come to the story of Jesus. He said that through him, God's presence and rule was coming into our world in a new way. And he presented himself as a new kind of priest.
But Jesus wasn't a priest, and he didn't work in the temple.
Right. Jesus said that God's presence, his rest and rule, was filling the world through his own life, death, and resurrection. Jesus was claiming that he was the true temple, and this new temple would expand out to include all of creation.
That's a really big claim.
And it got even bigger. After his resurrection, Jesus said that God's presence would come to dwell in and among his followers so that they would become mini temples.
Communities of people where God rests and rules.
Exactly. This is the Bible's vision of the church, which is described as a temple.
Not a building, but people.
Yeah, like when Peter says, "You all are living stones built up as a temple for God's Spirit to dwell."
So, at the end of the story, do we ever get a new physical temple?
Well, not exactly. What we see is a renewed cosmic temple, just like Genesis 1. And this new creation doesn't need a temple building because through Jesus, all creation is now the place where God rests and rules the world with his people.
Hey. Does anyone have any questions about that? What was that video telling us in short version, Cliff Notes version?
We in essence, what I'm getting, we in essence are God's temple ourselves, because God lives within us. If God lives within you, then you are kind of his temple.
Yeah, that's true.
where you can worship.
That's true. Anyone else?
I got all creation first, God rest.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what you're supposed to take away from this video and Genesis chapters 1 and 2 is that if you're paying attention, they were talking about how the description of God's creation of the world and the description of the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 2 is meant to be it's meant to make you think of the temple in Jerusalem. In other words, all of creation is kind of like a temple. Because what was the temple, by the way? The temple was where God lived with the Israelites, right? It's where he dwelt with the Israelites. In fact, the tabernacle, which was the tent that preceded the temple, it was called the dwelling place of God. And so Genesis chapters 1 and 2 is basically trying to portray or depict the world, especially the Garden of Eden, as God's temple. And that's why that's why the actual temple in Jerusalem, it was actually modeled after the Garden of Eden. Did you guys get that in the video? The menorah symbolized the tree of life, right? Here I wrote, this is a quote, if you look on the screen, by an Old Testament scholar named John Walton. He said, temples in the ancient world were considered symbols of the cosmos or the universe. So literally a temple is like a microcosm of how they perceive the world, basically. So for example, let's see. In Genesis 15, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. The Hebrew words for work and take care of, they're the exact same words that are used to refer to the Levites or the priests in the book of Numbers. So think about it, by the way. God makes a temple in the world, the Garden of Eden, right? And he puts us human beings, starting with Adam and Eve, in his temple. Remember, to be made to images of God were the idols in the temple, right? So we are the image of God and God's temple, and we are also the priests in his temple, taking care of his temple, taking care of God's home, in other words, right? So the Garden of Eden is depicted as a sanctuary, and Adam and Eve are depicted both as God's image and as God's priests. The word, by the way, the word to take care of also means to protect or watch over. And remember that when Adam and Eve encountered the serpent in Genesis chapter 3. I want to read just a few things, a few ways that the temple in Jerusalem mirrored the Garden of Eden. Number one, this is a book called God's Kingdom Through God's Covenants. Number one, the Garden of Eden is characterized by the presence of God. There, God comes to meet man at the cool of the day. The fifth pale stem of the word halak is iterative to walk back and forth. The same form is implied to describe the divine presence in later tent sanctuaries. Later on in Genesis chapter 3, the Garden of Eden is guarded by cherubim, right? You see cherubim later on in the temple as well. I already talked about how the menorah represents the tree of life. I talked about how Adam and Eve were tasked to work and to take care of the garden. Those are the words used for priests. And then there are a few other things that I'm not going to get into. But basically, the Garden of Eden is supposed to be a temple, and Adam and Eve were the images and the priests. Also, the Garden of Eden is in an elevated place. That's why there are 4 rivers flowing from it. Why is that important? Well, because temples in the ancient Middle East were always on like a mountaintop or a high hill, because those were the places in their imagination that heaven and earth overlapped, right? So it was kind of like the realm of the gods, or if you were an ancient Israelite and you only worshiped one God, it was the realm of God. And so think of Mount Sinai, right, in Exodus, or later on Mount Zion, which is the temple in Jerusalem. They were all, that's why they were mountains or high hills, because that's where That's the place where heaven and earth intersected. That's where God dwelt, so to speak. And they're known as the mountain of God. So if Eden is at a high place and you have rivers flowing from it, that means that Eden is kind of like a temple. John Milton again says, in the ancient way of thinking, caring for sacred space was a way of upholding creation. By preserving order, chaos was held at bay. Remember, God created the world out of disorder and chaos. And when he passes the baton to Adam and Eve, and he says, make the world a beautiful place to live in, they're also meant to hold back the forces of chaos at bay. That's why part of Adam's job description, so to speak, is to guard the Garden of Eden. And that's why when we finally get to Genesis chapter 3, that's why Adam and Eve actually failed at their task to protect, to guard the Garden of Eden. Okay. We're almost out of time. I just want to make a few more comments. Sean and I had a really great discussion last week. So in verse 18, it says, the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Now, remember, in Genesis chapter 1, God is constantly saying, after he created something, this is good, that is good, right? But then he sees Adam is by his lonesome self, and he says, okay, that is not good. And so he makes Eve, or a woman, as a helper. Now, when you and I hear the word helper, what do you think of? You think of something like a butler, right? Or an aide, someone inferior, right? Yeah, exactly. That's not what the word helper means in ancient Hebrew. In fact, helper is probably not the best translation. The word helper, azer, is actually used oftentimes in the Bible to refer to God. So for example, some of you might know Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I'm God. Earlier on in that psalm, God is described as an ever-present help in times of trouble. And the image is the city of Jerusalem being besieged and attacked, and God is coming to Jerusalem's help, to his aid. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Lord of the Rings, but there's a scene where the city of Gondor is being attacked. And if you don't get what I'm saying, then that's okay. But then another army comes out of nowhere, just when it seems all hope is lost, to attack the army that's attacking Gondor. Okay? In other words, another army is coming to the help, to the aid of Gondor. And that's the image that you and I are supposed to have when we read this word help or helpmate. It's not a subordinate role, it's actually the role of a partner. So actually in Genesis chapter 1, what we see is that men and women are meant to be equal partners. Eve was given to Adam because, remember, Adam's made in God's image. God is supposed to rule the earth through him, right? But Adam can't do that by himself. So therefore, God gives Adam as kind of the king of the world. God gives Adam a queen to rule alongside him. That's the image that you and I are supposed to have of men and women. Why is this important to us American Baptists? Well, we believe in women's ordination. We believe in women in ministry. And for us as American Baptists, that's a very, very important value that we have, that men and women are partners in this world. One more note. A lot of translations say that God took the rib out of Adam and formed woman out of that, or formed Eve out of that. The word Sela is actually, I put sign there, but that's the type of, it's actually better translated as side, S-I-D-E, side, which is an architectural term. It's used to refer to like the side of a building or like the side of a temple. So it's not referring to an actual literal rib, just FYI. Where is the Garden of Eden? Maybe we'll get into this next week. John Bolton writes that geography here is not topographical geography. So like when you look up something on Google Maps, that's not what it's talking about. It's more talking about how, like what we mean when we say all roads lead to Rome, which is to talk about not a literal place, but a place of importance. Okay, because Rome in the Roman Empire is like the center of the empire, right? Not the literal center, but it was a center in the sense that it was the most important place. And when you read Genesis chapter 2, it's hard to pinpoint a place where the Garden of Eden could be because only 2 of those rivers we know. And the description in Genesis chapter 2 doesn't exactly line up with what we know as a geography. So Genesis chapter 2 is not it's not trying to give us exact coordinates or directions. It's more talking about the Garden of Eden as a central place of importance in creation. Okay. Okay, I want to go through this really, really quickly because Cindy brought it up, and that's to end. How should we read Genesis chapters 1 through 3? And this is actually really, really, really important. This is why I want to mention it before we end. This is important because it determines how we read Genesis chapter 3 in particular. And what I want to propose to you is that we should read Genesis chapters 1 through 3 literally more than literally. What do I mean by that? Well, there are different types of literary genres, right? And as Sean was saying earlier, and as I was saying earlier, the literary genre that the author of Genesis chapters 1 through 3 is writing at, he's not really concerned about scientific facts, okay? So that's because the Bible really isn't meant to be, and it's not written to be a scientific textbook. Now, Genesis chapters 1 through 3 is history, but it's not history in the same way that you and I might think of history. And here's an example that I want to give. Can anyone tell me what that picture is from? Yeah, Hamilton, the musical. Hamilton, yeah, exactly. One of my favorite musicals, one of the best musicals in the past decade, I think. Hamilton is history, right? But you and I know there's a lot of artistic license in it. There are a lot of people of color there. That definitely wasn't the case in the Revolutionary War. George Washington wasn't literally rapping the whole time. Neither was Alexander Hamilton. There's a lot of artistry in there. And that's what you and I should think about when we read, especially Genesis chapter 1 and 3. It's something that happened in history, but we don't necessarily know all the details. There's some artistic license in there. And you see that especially in Genesis chapter, well, in all 3 chapters. There's a lot of poetic words. There's a lot of poetic imagery. There's a lot of symbolism. Because the author of Genesis chapter 1 and 3, what they're doing is they're taking the images that were popular in the ancient Near East, and they're telling a story from history using those images. In the same way that, remind me, who's the guy that did Hamilton? Just like the creator of Hamilton is taking something modern, like a cultural artifact, like rap, and using it to tell the story of the founding fathers. Okay. The author of Genesis chapter 1 through 3 is doing something similar. He's taking the poetry and the images of the ancient Middle East and using it to tell the story of Adam and Eve. Okay, so it's not meant to be a description of science. It's not meant to be, it is history, but it's history told in an artistic way. By the way, if you notice, in Genesis chapters 1 through 3, there's a lot of literal poetry in there, right? So for example, Adam, when God creates Eve, Adam literally bursts into song. and then when God pronounces the curse of sin on Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3, that is also a poem, right? It's almost like, you know, Genesis chapter 1 through 3 is kind of like a rock opera, right? What I'm trying to say is that it's a different literary genre than what you and I might expect as modern people. And so I want you to think about that especially when we get into Genesis chapter 3, which I promise we will do next week. And we talk about things like the serpent and all of that. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I know we're 15 minutes over time. If you do, please feel free to do what Sean did last week and pull me aside. And believe me, you are not bothering me by making me talk more about the Bible. Okay. If I have to go, then believe me, Amy will let me know. But I am more than happy to talk about the Bible ad nauseum to you because this is literally what I live for. Okay. Can I have a volunteer say a quick prayer? Because my voice is parched.
I will. Lord, thank you for letting us come together tonight and study your word. Thank you for Pastor Michael and his hard work.
Jane.
Thank you, Lord, for prepared food.
That's Jane.
Bless us, Lord, as we go on to do your work. And be with us, Lord. Be with our church, Lord. Help us to open our hearts and our minds to learn more of your word. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. And thank you.
I saw a cartoon just the other day that was Adam and Eve. And Adam is all bent over and holding